Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and it's part 5 of my Knights of the Frozen Throne card review. 8 new cards have already been revealed again in just a day's time, so I have to jump back in and start talking about all these exciting new cards, and there are some pretty crazy ones in this video. So as always, here's how this is going to work. I'm going to be talking about each of the cards in pretty great detail at the beginning of the video, but if you don't have a ton of time and you just want to see the card reveals, you can skip right to the end. There's a link in the description that will take you to my quick hit 5-star reviews, so you can just run through the cards and get my overall take on how good I think they're going to be. But if you're willing to stick around and listen to me talk for a while, I think you'll enjoy it. So let's go ahead and jump into this review. Up first is the new legendary minion for Druid by the name of Hadronox, a pretty creepy looking little spider, or presumably actually probably a big spider. But this is a 9-mana minion, and although it only has 3/7 in stats, pretty terrible for a 9-drop, it does have a very strong effect. This Death Rattle will summon all your taunt minions that died this game. So in some ways it's a N'Zoth for taunts instead of a N'Zoth for Death Rattles, but the difference between this card and N'Zoth is the fundamental problem with Hadronox, and that's that this effect is actually a death rattle and not a battle cry. So when you play N'Zoth, you know you're getting that instant value, you're loading up the board with stuff. It's a huge swing turn, it's a win condition all in one. With Hadronox, unfortunately, you kind of play it out there, and it probably just sits there for a while. Because it has 7 health, it's hard for you to actually kill this minion. Your opponent is clearly incentivized to leave it alive as well. There are potential things you can do as a Druid, of course, like naturalize your own Hadronox to activate the combo and activate the Death Rattle to pull out all your taunt minions. Although that's a possibility, I don't think that's a particularly strong play because you still give your opponent 2 cards, so they get some resources to deal with your new board. It's a 2-card combo, which admittedly isn't going to be difficult to do. That's not going to be the issue. It's just how good of a play is that, particularly when the card N'Zoth already exists. There's already a similar kind of win condition, super value, board-wide style play, so why would you build around Hadronox when you could build around N'Zoth as your win condition? Now, if you do look beyond Hadronox as a win condition kind of card, and maybe just consider it more of a value piece that you slot into your deck, but you don't really make your deck all about it, I think the card starts to make a little bit more sense in that regard if you do it in things like a big Druid, a giant ramp Druid that's able to run really high-cost minions. Those decks, as we know them now, already do run a few different taunts, things like the Curator, Primordial Drake. You could easily slot in a few more that would still fit that archetype really well. And then use Hadronox as just another piece of the puzzle and not really your big finisher. I think it makes a little bit more sense because you're more likely to get that Death Rattle value. Now, a lot of people look at this card and they probably say, oh my god, you can run Hadronox and N'Zoth and get like a super crazy N'Zoth where you bring your Hadronox back to life. Yes, of course you can. That is crazy. I would love to see that. I'm going to try to do that, of course, but I don't think that's going to be a very consistently good play, and not the kind of thing you want to build your deck around it. Because, of course, again, this card's really slow. It's very, very slow. You have to have an incredibly slow Druid deck for it to ever make sense. And even then, I really think it's still just too slow. If this card itself had Taunt, that would be absolutely absurd. I guess it would probably chain into itself, so that wouldn't really be fair. But if it had lower health totals, that would make more sense. If the cost was a little lower, it'd be a lot easier to play, but that would probably make it too overpowered. So in summary, I think this is a really fun card, a really cool card. I can't wait to play with it myself, but I really don't think it's going to be the kind of card that shows up in the meta very often just because it does have all those speed issues. But it wasn't the only Druid card revealed today. We also got to see the Fatespinner, and this is one of my favorite cards I've seen in years from Blizzard. I absolutely adore this card, and I think it might even be pretty good as well. The Fatespinner is a 5-mana minion with 5/3 in stats, and it has an effect we've never seen before. You get to choose a Death Rattle, so that's already a combination of kind of 2 keywords, the choose for Druid and Death Rattle, but it's a secret Death Rattle. So when you choose it, your opponent doesn't get to see which Death Rattle you chose. Now, I don't know how that's going to be displayed in-game, but they're just not going to be able to see it. So it's going to be a guess for them whether you chose to give it Death Rattle deal 3 damage to all minions, so basically a sort of a Hellfire that doesn't do face damage, or a +2/+2 buff to all minions. So it's a secret Death Rattle that's going to be crazy. And it's really awesome because it puts so much skill into the game. Instead of some sort of random effect, there's mind games happening, there's decisions, there's gambits, there's bets, there's bluffs. There are so many layers of depth and skill in this card. I wish we had more stuff like this in Hearthstone. More ways for opponents to interact with each other and make decisions that have big impacts on the game. You can imagine a million different scenarios where choosing one versus the other can be very, very beneficial to you or your opponent. Now, it seems like most of the time, probably the opponent is going to have a fairly good guess of which you chose, but there are always those bluff situations, and even then there's a lot of friction because they may not want to kill it, assuming you gave it 3 damage, setting you up for the swipe next turn where you clear their board and then play a bunch of tokens and buff your stuff. There's all kinds of shenanigans that can unfold. All that said, you still have to ask, is the card any good? Because it's a great design. I'm super encouraged by how well it's designed, but it has to still be a good card to ever see play. And I actually think it might be. Just because if you only ever choose deal 3 damage to all minions, this is probably still a good card for Druid, because Druid historically has had a lot of trouble with board clears, particularly of things that don't line up well with Swipe or Starfall or those sorts of cards. So a 3 damage AoE is something Druid's never had access to, and Fatespinner basically opens that door. 5/3 minion for 5 is not the most desirable stat allocation, right? But if it's doing 3 damage to everything, suddenly there are going to be turns and opportunities where this minion makes a lot of sense as just a setup basically to clear that shaman board the next turn, because you know they're looking to reload and you want to have some way to answer that kind of thing. So I think Fatespinner, just because of that one Death Rattle, actually makes a lot of sense. I don't think it's often going to be included in like a token deck as a mid-range piece to buff your board of tokens. I think it's too slow and too hard to predict and too hard to utilize to make sense in that environment. But in all kinds of other Druids, whether they be slow or maybe just some sort of mid-range Druid, Fatespinner could still work as an AoE removal card. It's just a mid-ranged body, a 5-attack minion that sets up some of the 5-attack combo synergy cards we've seen in the past for Druid and Unguro. So maybe that's an archetype that comes back. A lot of ways that this card could also just show up in your hand. So I just think it's going to be a cool little card. I think it's fun. I think it's fairly good. And it's the exact kind of card that Hearthstone desperately needs. So now let's move on to the next legendary minion up for reveal this time. It is Bolvar Fireblood, the new Paladin legendary minion. Much like we saw with Bolvar 4-Dragon in the past, this is another 5-mana 1/7 version of the card with a somewhat similar effect as well. This time around he has Divine Shield and a Divine Shield synergy effect that's apparently going to be a bit of a theme for Paladin in this expansion, as you'll see with a couple future cards here. But after a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, so if they trade in and bust their shield, if you play Blood Knight and steal their shield, it's going to proc this effect. Bolvar will gain +2 attack. Now, based on the wording of this, it doesn't look like it's going to happen in hand. It looks like he has to be on the board for this to work. If you look at the previous card, it said when this card is in your hand. It also doesn't match up with Blood Queen Lanathel's wording, where it says cards you've discarded this game. So it looks like Bolvar has to be on the board to receive this effect. So it's really all about getting a wide board of multiple Divine Shield minions, running them in with Bolvar, getting him up to 3, 5, 7, 9 attack, essentially, and getting a pretty aggressively statted minion with Divine Shield, nonetheless, for only 5 mana. It's very similar in what the previous Bolvar was trying to do too, just getting a really high attack minion for 5 mana, just, kind of a stat efficiency play. This one's a little bit better right off because of the Divine Shield aspect. And remember, his Divine Shield being broken also procs himself. So if you get him out there as a 1/7 with Divine Shield and you get to attack, he becomes a 3/7 after that shield drops off. So a lot of the times he'll be a 3/7, but he'll also a lot of the times just die to Shadow Word Pain if you leave him out there. So this is really going to be more about comboing out on a given turn where you know you're going to get some sort of value. The problem here is that I just think that's going to be really, really hard to do. The video where they revealed this, they showed you this like perfect setup scenario where he got buffed to high heaven. I don't think that's very likely. I think usually it's like one Divine Shield if you're lucky, and he's often just going to be sitting in your hand as a dead card. If you get like 2 or 3, that's going to be absolutely crazy, insanely lucky. And even then, he's going to be like a 5-7 or a 7-7 with Divine Shield. So he's not going to be that powerful or that strong of a card, because at the end of the day, he's just going to be stats on the board. He's basically just going to be a little bit cheaper of a Force Tank Max, if you guys can remember that card from Goblins vs. Gnome, 7-7 with Divine Shield for 8 mana. That was not a great constructed card, particularly with all the risks that Bolvar Fireblood has. So for me, just a bit of a middling card. If he didn't have Divine Shield himself, I think this would be a terrible card. But a lot of the times, you know, he'll be a 3-7 for 5 that got to activate at least a little bit of a Divine Shield trigger. Occasionally roll a bit higher, so, you know, an average 5-drop. Not as good as other Paladin Legendaries, obviously. Maybe won't work at all if that deck archetype doesn't show up and doesn't pan out. So a lot of risk in this card, not something I'd ever recommend crafting, but might occasionally show up from time to time and have a very small impact on games. So moving on to the next Paladin card. This time around, it's a weapon called Light's Sorrow. And as you can see from the effect here, it borrows the same thing as Bolvar there. After a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, this gains +1 attack instead of +2, like Bolvar. So a little bit slower than Bolvar, but, you know, a cheaper card and a weapon. It's a 4-mana card, and it only has 1 attack by default. So, you know, if you compare this to something like Assassin's Blade, for instance, you'd have to sacrifice 2 Divine Shields to make this comparable to Assassin's Blade. A little bit cheaper than Assassin's Blade as well. The problem, of course, comes back to consistency and really just how slow this could be. Because if you develop it on 4, you're spending a lot. You don't know that you're going to be able to activate Divine Shields consistently when you want to play this. So it might be a 2-4 to start and then kind of slowly go up and maybe be a 3-3, occasionally a 4-2. It's also probably just going to sit for a few turns and not do much. It might be a Light's Justice a lot of the time when you just have some spare mana and no Divine Shields to activate, which is a very expensive Light's Justice. Occasionally it'll roll into the 4-4 and you'll feel amazing, and that'll be a really strong play. The problem for me with Light Sorrow is simply that it has to compete against so many strong 4-drops and weapons for Paladin already. True Silver Champion is an incredible weapon. Having that 4 damage on lock, knowing you're going to have it on turn 4, is so valuable. Frankly, Rallying Blade is another Divine Shield synergy weapon that is much more predictable and still gives you that Divine Shield value in a Divine Shield deck. So I don't even think Light Sorrow is better than Rallying Blade. Rallying Blade's a really solid card in Paladin these days. And of course, that doesn't even count for all the other 4-drops, Consecration, Blessing of Kings, etc., etc. Paladin's known for having a ton of 4-drops. So I just don't see how this one could be better, how it competes, even for the deck that it's designed for. Seems to me like you have better options in the slot. So not a great weapon at first glance, and even upon further review, still doesn't feel very good to me. It would probably be okay if you had to play it, but there are better choices out there. Up next is a neutral card, although it really feels a bit like a Paladin card. This is the Corpsetaker, a new 4-mana 3/3 minion with a crazy battle cry. Gain Taunt if your deck has a Taunt minion, and then repeat this for Divine Shield, Lifesteal, and Wind Fury. So essentially this is the keyword minion of everyone's dreams. If you like keywords, you like Corpsetaker. If you hit all those, clearly a very high value 4-mana minion. Like if you get all those things on a single minion, the fact that it has 3/3 is irrelevant. Those are just a lot of things to make a minion valuable. That's going to be amazing. The question is, can you build a deck that runs all of those naturally? Something like Alakir the Windlord satisfies quite a few of those on his own. So maybe this makes sense for Shaman 2. Wickerflame Burn Bristle satisfies quite a few of those on his own because he is getting Lifesteal if you hadn't heard. So for Shaman and Paladin, maybe just one Legendary could meet most of these needs. The issue, the risk there is you can draw those out of order because it does have to be in your deck, not just at the start of the game, but left in your deck. So if you draw Alec here before your Corpsetaker and you don't have any backup plans, your Corpsetaker becomes just a standard regular old 4-mana 3/3. But when it comes to a card like this, what it really comes down to is just how consistently you can get a couple of these keywords. Sometimes it's going to be that 4-mana Wickerflame Burn Bristle, and that's going to be a fantastic card. Other times it might just be an Ironfur Grizzly that you overpaid for, and nobody's running Ironfur Grizzly in their deck. So if you can build a deck that gets this to work consistently enough, it's an okay card. It's an above average card. It's an extra Wickerflame Burn Bristle. If you roll just 2 of these keywords at any given point, it's still probably a solid card. It's a Silvermoon Guardian with Taunt. I think that's a playable card. It's, again, an above average card. The risk is when you fail pretty hard, and I'm not sure the upside here is high enough to make up for that risk. I think it's an okay card. I think in the right kind of deck, it could actually work if the deck is built really specifically to satisfy this condition. You know, the super Wickerflame Burn Bristle card is really good. That's a card people would want to run, but how often does that get pulled off? How many Lifesteal cards are available? Is Wind Fury ever in the option for a class like Paladin? I don't know. There's a lot of questions to be answered there. This feels like the kind of thing you just have to test to see how it works. I'm not totally writing it off, though, because I do see some potential in those couple classes, and maybe there's 1 or 2 more where this could do some cool stuff, too. So this card, surprisingly, for a neutral epic, I think it could see a little bit of constructed play. I don't know for sure. I have some serious doubts, but I wouldn't totally count out the Corpsetaker just yet. Moving on to another neutral card, this is the Bonemare, and it is the nightmare for every arena player. I'm sure Crip has already lost his mind looking at this card. I think this is potentially the best arena card we've ever seen. It is Blessing of Kings that also gives you Taunt attached to a 5/5 body for only 7 mana. So it's absolutely a dream in Arena. It is absurd because you always have a minion laying around in Arena, or you can play a cheap one alongside this to essentially get 9/9 in total stats for 7 mana, often giving 4/4 of those stats charge because you already had a minion loaded up on the board. Also giving something Taunt, which is very powerful in Arena. Just absurd Arena card. Absolutely ridiculously crazy. In Constructed, I kind of think still a good card. Believe it or not, it's so rare that we see just a neutral common minion show up in Constructed ever. But I think Bonemare has some potential. I don't think it's going to be a one of in a ton of decks like Primordial Drake is now. First off, because the Curator's not there to consistently draw it and empower it. I don't think it's that good. But I can see a home for this in some of those aggressive mid-range style decks, something like we saw with Dragon Warrior in the past, where they ran Draconid Operative at the top of their curve to just play that really big body and those big stat totals near the mid-range of the game, turn 6, 7, 8, those kinds of turns. That was a really powerful finisher style card for them. Bonemare to me serves the very same utility, but in fact gives a lot of those stats charge, which is really good for those decks because they're always looking for more aggression and more instant damage or some really high value trades, and taunts can also protect really valuable resources in a deck like that. So I'm not saying Dragon Warrior specifically because clearly that archetype is gone with a lot of the dragons it lost, but a deck like that has a bit more of a mid-rangey curve, but is still looking to apply a lot of pressure and a lot of damage. Even, frankly, something like we've seen with Murloc Paladin that runs those Blessing of Kings, Bonemare might fit in a deck like that. Like, that's the kind of mid-range, aggressive start deck that could support this kind of card in my eyes. So I'm not saying it's going to show up all the time because there are good 6-drops, 7-drops, 8-drops that fill the same kind of need for those decks. But occasionally if a class is looking for just that one piece to fill in, that one card that completes what they're trying to accomplish in a nice way, Bonemare has the potential there. This Battlecry is that strong. The total stat value here is nice. There's a lot of good things happening in this card. It's basically a taunted Blessing of Kings with a 3-mana 5/5 body attached. And that's a pretty strong play, all bundled into a single card. So I can't really believe it, but Bonemare seems pretty good. This is in my mind a playable card. I mean, granted, I don't think it's going to be everywhere. I don't think this is a 4-star card necessarily. I just think it's a playable card, which is remarkable for just being a neutral common late game control style minion. That's something we never ever see, and yet here we are. Good job, Blizzard. And now finally I have 2 more Hunter cards, the first of which is the greatest thing I've ever seen in the history of the world, because it's called the Abominable Bowman. It's like Snowman, but he's a Bowman instead. Guys, get it? It's super funny, but the artwork is also awesome. This is a 7-mana minion for Hunter. Once again, another more control-style card for Hunter. It's got the Boulderfist Ogre stat line of 6/7 and a Death Rattle that summons you a random friendly beast that died this game. So, I mean, the first card that came to mind to me when comparing this was Savannah Highmane, right? That's classic Hunter card with Death Rattle, more of a mid-range to late game cost, 6 versus 7, even similar stats in some ways. And unfortunately, I don't think the Abominable Bowman is as good as Savannah Highmane, just because that Death Rattle is random, which means occasionally it could hit things like Alley Cats or even, 2 or 3 mana minions that aren't necessarily good enough. Crackling Razor Maws, right? It's not as good as Highmane's guaranteed 2/2/2s. You get a total of 4/4 in stats on Highmane every single time. That consistency plus the slightly lower cost of Highmane to me means it's just going to be a more consistent card. And I don't know that a Hunter deck can ever really run that many minions of the same style at the same similar cost range, because they don't actively affect the board ever, right? They're just those value plays you throw down and hope it sticks. Sometimes they're really, really slow. But you can afford that often in Hunter if you're ahead on the board and you're pressuring your opponent a lot and you're just looking for a big thing that's hard for them to deal with. Highmane works for that. But can you do it 2 or 3 turns in a row? I'm not quite so sure. I'm not sure you need that. You probably need other things in your deck to suit that need. So I'm just not sure I ever see a deck or a world where the Abominable Bowman gets ran instead of Savannah Highmane, just because of the risks of that Death Rattle. Now, there are obviously some high rolls too. You could Death Rattle into a Savannah Highmane with Abominable Bowman, which would be absolutely absurd. That would be the best thing in history, and in some matchups that could work. So if we do see a really late game, super control style Hunter, this could be the kind of card that fits in there. It could make a spot. Maybe not a 2 of, maybe a 1 of, right? Because you just don't usually have that much room for 7 drops. But also it's a Death Rattle synergy card, so there could be some potential synergies there as well. This does not go into the Build a Beast rotation, so that's not a consideration because it's over 5 mana. But not a bad card at a fundamental level. If you look at the stats and the effect, there's some good things happening here. I'm just not sure it's better than what Hunter already has access to, so I don't think it sees a lot of play, even though it's probably an okay card. And then we've got one more card, the card everybody wanted to see since the very first trailer. This is the Bearshark, the greatest artwork ever. I don't know if I like this or Abominable Bowman better, but Hunter is clearly the meme class for Knights of the Frozen Throne, which is really exciting. These are 2 amazing looking cards. The Bearshark is a 3-mana beast. He is a 4/3, and his effect is that he can't be targeted by spells or hero powers, so he's a grown-up fairy dragon essentially for Hunter, but also that beast tag is important. This is an okay card. A lot of people are saying this is going to be a guaranteed run in place of things like Rat Pack for a mid-range Hunter style deck. I'm not quite as convinced as a lot of the community that that's the case. I think 3 health is still really susceptible to a lot of different things that we've seen in the game lately. Fiery War Axe is always there and will always be a very good answer to this card. So, Animal Companion, 2 out of the 3 options don't die to Fiery War Axe. Bearshark dies to Fiery War Axe every time. Bearshark also trades really poorly into Tar Creeper, one of the most common 3-drops in the game. He dies to Medivh's Valet. Sure, he dodges Frostbolt, unlike some of those other cards I mentioned, but still susceptible to a lot of different things. So I'm not as convinced he's going to be the perfect 3-drop as a lot of people are. Not to mention he still trades into minions like a 3 health body, so there's no upside there either. So I'm actually not sure he's better than Animal Companion, even if he is a little more consistent. Animal Companion, on average, I think survives to more things. So even though he's a great pre-Houndmaster kind of card, if you can hit the Houndmaster on Bearshark, that's going to be a really, really good turn. because, you know, 5 health is even harder to deal with if it can't be targeted. But I'm just not sure that he's better than some of the 3-drop options that already exist. I think I might still like Rat Pack and Animal Companion a little better. That said, he could still be played. Certainly some decks and some metas would support this card more than others. So nothing wrong with this card. I think he's fine. I think he's good. In the right environment, this is the kind of card that can see success. I don't see that environment just yet, but it's certainly a possibility. So keep your eyes out for Bearshark, because I know that I personally would love to see him in as many games as possible, just to laugh at that artwork every single time. And there you go, guys. That was it for my detailed review portion for part 5 here, my Knights of the Frozen Throne card review. Had quite a bit to say about each of those cards. There were some promising cards in this set, a few duds as well, but again, I think some great designs. So hopefully these cards find some success, because I really like the designs on a lot of these cards. Blizzard's getting more creative, encouraging the right kinds of play and the right kinds of behavior amongst their players. So I think that's a really good sign once again. But now what I'd like to do is jump into my quick reviews where I rate each of these cards from 1 to 5 stars. So let's go ahead and rate these cards. Up first is Hadronox, which I'm giving 2 stars. Fatespinner will be a 4-star card to me. Bolvar Fireblood is another 2-star card. Light's Sorrow is a 1-star card. Corpsetaker is a 3-star card. Bonemare is a 3-star card. 5 stars in Arena every time. Abominable Bowman is a 3-star card, and Bearshark is a 3-star card. So that wraps it up, guys, for part 5 of my Knights of the Frozen Throne review. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know a lot of people out there are going to think I'm wrong about a lot of cards. Some of you might think I'm right about an occasional card here or there. In either case, I'd still like to hear your take. What are your thoughts? What are your comments on each of these cards? Because really, I learn more from you guys than you probably ever learn from me. So leave a comment below with your thoughts. What's going to be good? What's going to be bad? What's going to shake up the meta? What's going to be the surprise hit of the expansion? Why don't you teach me a little bit? I'd love to hear your spin. So all that said, guys, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.